The Gunfighter was an excellent Western from 1950, starring Gregory Peck as an outlaw who wants to turn from his dark past and just be left alone, and maybe finally settle down with his sweetheart. But everywhere he goes, there's someone who knows who he is and wants to look for trouble with him. Can an outlaw escape his dark past? Well, you have to watch the film to find out, and this was a fantastic Western. And thanks to my friend Dustin Neely for this suggestion. I'll summarize the film and then offer some closing thoughts on the movie. Well, the film opens up. We have some stirring music by Alfred Newman as a horse and rider make their way through some desert sands. Now, Gregory Peck plays the character Jimmy Ringo, not to be confused with Johnny Ringo, who was an actual outlaw. More on that later. The opening credit text tells us about how this Jimmy Ringo is the fastest man with a gun who ever lived. He's a long, lean Texan named Ringo. Well, he rides into town, he goes to a saloon and asks for a drink. And at a nearby table, there's this group of cowboys who size him up, including the character Eddie, who's Richard Jekyll of many films I've seen before, like The Dirty Dozen. Now, even though the guys at the table warn him not to do it, he goes up to the bar and he tries to pick a fight with Ringo. Or Mr. Frazzlebottom, as he calls him. Mr. Frazzlebottom? Okay. Well, Ringo just wants to be left alone. He doesn't want fights, and he tries to avoid the conflict, but Eddie isn't having it. And of course, Eddie gets shot. Now, the guys around the bar tell Ringo, hey, we saw Eddie draw first, get out of here. And, Eddie's got some brothers, and they're going to want revenge. So Ringo leaves town, but the three brothers are in pursuit. Now, thinking they'll catch up with him eventually, they're surprised when Ringo actually gets the drop on them from atop a rock.
Now drop your guns. Right out there where I can see them.
So Ringo scares off their horses, and he makes these outlaws walk back to town, but they swear revenge. Now, one of the brothers, by the way, was Alan Hale Jr. of Gilligan's Island fame. The skipper. Well, hello, little buddy. Well, anyhow, Ringo heads off to a new town. Now, this is a town of Cayenne. And, of course, he heads to the saloon right away to get a drink. Now, the bartender, Mac, is played here by actor Carl Malden, who's been in a bunch of films I've reviewed on this channel. He recognizes him, and he's really excited to see him again. He knows him from somewhere in the past. Ringo's tired, and all he asks for is a steak, some eggs, and a pot of black coffee. A tough guy breakfast. So the bartender sends a guy to stable his horse, but outside he tells him, go notify the marshal that Jimmy Ringo is in town. So the kid goes to find Marshal Strett, who's played here by actor Millard Mitchell. He's been in a number of crime films I've reviewed, like Convicted and Kiss of Death. Well, much like Gregory Peck here, the marshal is also sporting an awesome mustache. Well, he gathers his deputies and heads to the saloon for what you think might be a tense showdown. But when Ringo sees the marshal, he greets him like an old friend. And they sit down, they have some coffee, and the marshal pretty much tells Ringo, you got to get out of town to avoid any trouble here. But he's cool about it. A lot of times in the old westerns, the marshal usually wants the bad guys out of town. A lot of times they'll kill the bad guy, but in this case, since they're friends, he gives him kind of a window of time that he needs to leave. So around this time, people have started gathering around the saloon. Kids especially, they're just outside watching what they think is almost like a celebrity, this famous gunslinger who is in town.
How'd you like to see that street out there full of gunplay, Mark?
I'd rather not.
Well, that's probably what you're going to have a couple hours from now. Because I ain't leaving here till you get a hold of Peggy for me.
So Ringo is in this town. He's not really wanting any trouble, but all he wants is to go and see someone named Peggy. And the marshal seems really cold about this idea and refuses. Just really wants Ringo out of town. Finally, he agrees that he'll go talk to her for him. On the way, he talks with his deputy, Charlie, played by actor Anthony Ross, who I caught long ago in the film Country Girl. Basically warns him to be careful around Ringo. And the deputy doesn't seem to want any trouble. So the marshal goes to meet with schoolteacher Peggy Walsh. She's played here by lovely actress Helen Westcott. And she doesn't seem interested in going to meet with Ringo. Although she asks things like, how does Johnny look and so on. So we, the viewer, know that maybe she still has feelings for this guy. Meanwhile, at the local general store, a bunch of the local ladies are chattering away about Ringo when Jerry Malone, played by actor Cliff Clark, asks what's going on. When he finds out about Ringo, he heads right away, goes up to his room, grabs a rifle, and he is ready to just shoot and kill Ringo when he walks out the front. His wife tries unsuccessfully to calm him down. So we see that everywhere people go, they either love or they hate this Jimmy Ringo guy. So the marshal returns and he talks to Ringo, basically saying Peggy doesn't want anything to do with him. Ringo then asks about his son, and the marshal tells him that, he might be outside playing with some of the other boys out there, but he can't tell for sure. So Ringo seems really despondent, and he's ready to clear out of town when he sees Molly, actress Jean Parker. I caught her not long ago in the movie Texas Rangers with Fred McMurray. They have a friendly talk, and eventually, he asks about Peggy, and she agrees to go and talk to her for him. Now, over at the local barbershop, there's a bunch of tough guys, they're talking, and this young, tough cowboy character, he talks about facing Ringo, and this guy here, Hunt Bromley, was played by actor Skip Homeier, probably said his name wrong, who in a weird, obscure reference, I remember seeing this guy from a classic Star Trek episode, The Way to Eden. He was the hippie guy with the crazy ears. So many interesting and obscure actors in this film. It was great. Anyhow, he wants to go and see what Ringo is all about. And it's, actually funny as none of the guys there want to go with him.
Well, suit yourself, yellow bellies.
Well, it never was much fun to have around anyway.
So this Hunt character faces off with Ringo, and as you can expect, Ringo, he doesn't want anything to do with him, but when provoked, he schools him and tells him he's got a gun under the table pointed at him and that he needs to scram. And Hunt doesn't seem happy about this, but he walks out. We're probably going to run into him later. Meanwhile, the three brothers from the beginning of the film, they arrive at a farm and they ask character Mr. Barlow to borrow some of his horses. And note, he's played here by actor Housley Stevenson, who I caught recently as the creepy old plastic surgeon to Humphrey Bogart's character in the movie Dark Passage. Again, I loved watching this film and spotting all of these somewhat obscure actors along the way. This was great. Well, Peggy brings her son home. And, he seems disappointed. He didn't get to see a gunfight or anything like that. Molly is there and tells Peggy that Ringo just wants to see her and talk to her. And as they talk together, we find out that there's pretty much been no one else in her life. And Peggy, deep down, still has feelings.
Then it's still Jim, isn't it?
I guess so. I guess it always will be.
The marshal calls for this Hunt Bromley character and tells him to leave Ringo alone. And then he sends Deputy Charlie to go sit by Ringo with a shotgun to keep him safe. Now Ringo is about to step outside when he notices the gun from the Marlowe character across the street, almost gets killed, quickly gets back inside, then sneaks around to find out who it is. Gets to the room, draws his gun, and gets a drop on this Jerry Marlowe character, asks who he is. Marlowe accuses Ringo of killing his son, but Ringo has no memory of it. So he takes him out and brings him to the marshal, and as nobody is there, Ringo just locks the guy up himself. But around the same time, when asked about the shooting, he tells the guy he was never in the city where that shooting allegedly took place, and that he was innocent of actually killing his son. Now, it's around this point that we see the character Miss August Pennyfeather arrive. I love that name. Arrives with a bunch of other local ladies there at the marshal's office. They're just kind of a gossipy little group of women. Now, Miss Pennyfeather is played by Verna Felton, who was the legendary voice actress from various Disney films, like the fairy godmother from Cinderella. Bibbidi bobbidi boo. Well, this group of ladies, they have no idea who this Ringo outlaw character is. And there's a very funny scene that follows in which Ringo basically interacts with them like he's just some average Joe, addressing their issues with Ringo and about how many men he had killed and so on. And the marshal arrives and gets in on this dialogue as well, and just comes to a funny ending.
Thank you very much. That's a very reasonable, intelligent idea.
Don't thank me, ma'am. Thank Mr. Ringo.
Oh, but of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Ringo. Mr. Ringo! Ladies, please. Come on. Ladies.
So the marshal tells a stable guy to get a horse ready for Ringo. But, oh, that no-good Hunt Bromley is there listening from the shadows. Well, Ringo heads back to the saloon. Finally, it's around here that Molly brings him in to talk with Peggy. And it's at this point Ringo appeals with her to go with him and settle down somewhere. Now, she seems interested in the idea. She says it sounds grand, but that it's too late. Now, he's determined, though, and he really wants to be back with her, but he proposes that he will just hide out for a year, just to kind of lay low and then return. And then after that year, if she's still interested, then they'll be together. Now, he also wants to see his son, but the marshal, he's insistent that Ringo gets out of town because these bad guys are on the way. And sure enough, now that they have horses to ride, that trio of bad guys, they're just about to arrive. Ringo gets a chance to meet with his son and has a nice little talk with him, not straight out revealing who he is, that, he's this kid's dad, but instead just asks him friendly questions to get to know him and gives him some fatherly guidance. And it's kind of a bittersweet scene, as we know he wants to be a father, but because of who he is and of his past, it's not very likely to happen.
That's a good boy. Guess we picked out the right fella after all. Well, he's all right. You got a good boy, Mrs. Walsh.
So his plan is to return in a year. And things seem to be going well, but then the marshal says the line, "Looks like you're going to make it after all." Oh, come on, Marshal, you never say things like that in a movie. Well, with only a few minutes left, with the three baddies in waiting and with Ringo about to leave town, I'm going to leave the review here and let you catch the ending for yourself. So some closing thoughts. The Gunfighter was an amazing film. It was produced by 20th Century Fox, and it was directed by Henry King. Regarding the story, screenwriter William Bowers would have dinner, apparently, with retired heavyweight boxing champion Jack Dempsey. And it was here, when they would be eating together, that Dempsey said that his recurring problem was that people in the public all the time would just want to come up to him and start a fight. And Bowers was listening to this and found that interesting and wanted to apply that idea to that of a Western gunfighter. So it's kind of interesting how the origin of that idea came from. And the final script was the work of several writers, Bowers and Andre Datoth for the story, and also Bowers and William Sellers for the screenplay. Producer Nunnally Johnson also contributed to the script, but never took any screenwriting credit for it. Now, Bowers and Sellers' script was originally called The Big Gun, and they wrote it with John Wayne in mind. And honestly, he would have been pretty awesome in this film, but there was a disagreement on the amount of pay and so on. So the film went to 20th Century Fox, and Gregory Peck was eventually cast. And apparently, in this movie, his mustache was very controversial. Director Henry King really insisted on Gregory Peck having it for authenticity. But when the studio chief, Daryl Zanuck, saw an early cut of the film, he was quoted as saying, "I would give $50,000 of my own money if I could get that mustache off that guy. This man has a young following. Young girls like him. That mustache, I'm afraid, is going to kill it." Well, I don't know. I don't think the film was a huge commercial success, but watching it now, I think this is one of the greatest Westerns I've ever seen. And I really enjoyed it. I thought Gregory Peck was fantastic as this quiet, brooding gunslinger who really just wants to be left alone, maybe get together with his sweetheart, but he has this reputation that just follows him everywhere, and he just can't get away from his past. You have people that love him, people that hate him, but wherever he goes, he's like a celebrity. The small-town locations looked really great in this film and believable. I just loved all of the details of the saloon, the town streets, the interiors of like the local lodging. It really felt like this was a story set in an authentic, small, old Western town with very careful attention to detail. And as mentioned, I always love spotting all of those familiar actors just kind of peppered through the story. And I did like how you had all of these young upstarts who wanted to just get in the face of Ringo and pick a fight with him, and he just wanted to be left alone. And I thought the scene where Ringo faces off against Hunt Bromley, it reminded me of Han Solo when he meets with Greedo, with the secret gun under the table. And of course, we all know Han shot first. I also thought it was noteworthy how there's a sense of suspense that just hangs over the entire film. Not just with the cocky gunfighter showing up to challenge Ringo, but the fact that we established from the very beginning of the film, we know that there are these 3 cowboys and they're on their way for revenge. And that just looms and hangs over the entire film. In a way, it reminded me of the film High Noon with Gary Cooper, where there was a similar situation of the bad guys that are on their way into town to face off against the hero. And I like that. It kind of keeps you a little bit not very comfortable. You're kind of on the edge, wondering what's going to finally happen. Now, a historical note, as I understand it, the film stars the character Jimmy Ringo, not to be confused with Johnny Ringo, who was an actual infamous outlaw cattle rancher. He was at the OK Corral at the showdown with Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, Arizona, back in 1881. And I think there's even a mystery around Johnny Ringo's death, whether it was suicide or if he was killed by Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, or another rival. And of course, there have been many films made around Tombstone, with, of course, the one from 1993, Tombstone, with Michael Biehn as Johnny Ringo. Now, since the very end of the review is right here, I'm going to drop a semi-spoiler with a few rambling thoughts. So look, if you haven't seen the film, this is a last warning. Drop off of the trolley here. Hit the next button or something, because I'm going to give a slight spoiler. Okay, everybody safe? Okay, and without totally spoiling the film, I'll just share that, as you can guess, the film features a less than happy ending for Jimmy Ringo. In thinking about it, the message of the film is very much one of, if you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. And Ringo, as this outlaw character with a dark past and a track record of killing, is honestly someone that could never truly settle down anywhere. So this idea of him being with Peggy and finally being in a family situation could never have really been a reality. And as I watched this, part of me was just hoping that his character was just there in town to say his last goodbyes and then just slip away mysteriously, maybe south of the border. That tends to be a tactic used in a lot of these old films, just to hide away and vanish, but that didn't happen. And again, things didn't end well for the outlaw here. I've seen this theme in other westerns, but also notably in old crime noir films, where the protagonist is a guy with a rocky past, and they're just trying to get away from it all, and they want to start again. That past still weighs heavily on them, but try as they might, they can never really escape it. Someone like Gene Nelson's character in the film Crime Wave from 1953. It's something I love seeing in a film like this. And yet it's a story element that just hangs over the character and it leaves the viewer wondering if they're ever going to be able to escape their past and start again, or if they're always just going to get pulled back into the world of crime. And thinking about it, it seems like there are only a handful of directions a character like this can take. The hero falls back into their past life, embraces the world of crime that they know, and that usually ends poorly. The Stanley Kubrick film The Killers comes to mind, with Sterling Hayden making one more play at a bank heist and ultimately failing. And also sometimes the hero can be successful in hiding out for a long time, starting a new life, but then inevitably someone finds them and lures them back out again. Another example would be Out of the Past with Robert Mitchum. Or they accept their dark past, move beyond it, and don a badge, adhering to the law as their standard to atone for their past, such as in this movie, the character Marshall Strett, which in a way also reminded me of Kurt Russell's character Wyatt Earp from the character in Tombstone from '93. I love it all because it gets me thinking later, usually when I can't sleep, pondering what I would have done if I was in the same situation. And, to me, that's the mark of a great film with a great story and great writing. It just keeps you wondering after you watch it, how could things have gone different? What could Ringo have done differently here? Or was he just doomed from the start? In any case, The Gunfighter from 1950 was fantastic. Gregory Peck, as usual, was amazing, as were all of the supporting characters. The story is great. There's a sense of tension throughout the film that leaves you hanging. It's just a fantastic Western, and definitely one worth checking out.